Hello, Degrassi fans, and welcome to another episode of the Degrassi Kid podcast. Guys, this has been so much fun. I didn't think anyone would sit down and listen to me talk about Degrassi for half an hour. This has just been amazing, and it truly means so much to me, so thank you so much. Oh my god. But I was thinking, where you guys are trusting me to give you a good Degrassi podcast every single week, I want to do something totally different this time. My goal is I want to dive into one of Degrassi's most talked about moments, and I want to do it in a way where if you've never even seen a single episode of Degrassi, you could still fully understand this podcast and walk away with an understanding of the context and the importance of this big moment in Degrassi's history. But at the same time, even if you're Degrassi's biggest superfan, you've seen every episode, you've watched every behind the scenes interview, I want to challenge myself that even you would walk away from this podcast and think, oh, I just never thought about it like that. That's my goal. So what do I want to do today? I want to talk about Degrassi's most controversial episodes when Degrassi handles abortion. Do you think I can do it? Do you think I can actually take Degrassi's most historically documented moment and actually teach you something you don't know? I hope so, because that's what I want to do today, and we're going to do it. We're going to break down Degrassi's history of abortion on the Degrassi Kid podcast. One of the things Degrassi does best is they explore the same topics over and over again. And I know what you're probably thinking. Why would they make the same episode twice? Like, who would even watch that? Well, guys, this is what makes Degrassi my favorite show. Because Degrassi's been on the air for over 40 years, they're able to tell the same stories over multiple generations. For example, in Degrassi Junior High, Arthur and Yick are curious about sex, so they get their hands on a VHS tape called Swamp Sex Robots. In The Next Generation, Toby and JT use their home computer to visit websites with XXX in the title. And in Degrassi Next Class, of course, teenagers now have cell phones, where they can not only look at certain images online, but send them as well. And on top of that, Degrassi has a huge ensemble cast that's stocked with these authentic, true-to-life characters. So when Degrassi explores a topic, it can look different for every single person, just like in real life. Last week, I shared my coming out experience, but that experience can look so different for so many different people, especially as the world changes around us. So today, let's dive in to 3 different characters who made the tough and controversial decision to have an abortion while still in high school. We'll meet the characters Erica Farrell, Manny Santos, and Lola Pacini, who were each faced with this decision in 1989, 2003, and 2017. Let's go through what makes their stories so special, what makes them so different, and what the world looked like around these girls when they had to face this reality all on their own. And of course, we'll talk about how much pushback Degrassi faced for telling controversial stories about teenagers, unprotected sex, and abortion. The first time we hear about abortion on Degrassi was the opening episode of Degrassi High in 1989. So why now? Why was this the time to tackle abortion? Well, at Degrassi Palooza in 2018, co-creator Kit Hood commented on the decision to follow the Degrassi characters from junior high to high school. And Kit said, "As the kids grew up, the stories did too, and we wanted to tell them. I mean, we couldn't do an episode called The Kids of Degrassi Street Discover AIDS." And guys, I was at the panel when he said this, and I just thought it was so funny. But first, I wanted to take a pause and say I feel so lucky I had the opportunity to meet Kit Hood before he passed away just a few years ago. Kit Hood was an original co-creator of Degrassi, and from hearing Kit talk, you could tell that making films and telling stories was a passion of his. And it was so nice that before he passed, he got to see just how much of an impact the show made with fans. And I'm happy to tell the stories that he helped create. But back to his Degrassi Street quote. Kit makes a great point. With the start of Degrassi High, the stories could now become elevated. However, Degrassi's head writer Yan Moore never expected to do an abortion episode. He said the topic was too hot and he didn't know how they could ever tackle it. But because Degrassi's all about balanced storytelling, it became important to tell the story after 14-year-old Spike became pregnant in Degrassi Junior High and had her baby Emma. And Yan said, "We followed through with what happens when you keep your baby, and we thought, well, we should do the other side too." So now we know why Degrassi wanted to do an abortion storyline, but who was going to tell the story? One thing we want to remember is the co-creator Linda Schuyler was a junior high school teacher before she started making Degrassi, and Linda carried a lot of these educational values into her production company, not only in how they told stories on Degrassi, but how the kids were actually involved in making them. When it came time to make the abortion episode, it was something you would see out of a real high school debate class. They gave the actors pro-choice and anti-abortion monologues and had them improvise around the issue. Because Degrassi cast age appropriately, they had direct access to the most important resource for a teen TV show. They had actual real-life teenagers, and they could see how actual real-life teenagers would talk about the subject. And during this exercise, Linda and the Degrassi team felt like Maureen and Angela Dayshock handled the topic best, and they played the twins Heather and Erica on Degrassi. And up until this point, they were mostly secondary characters. But with this exercise, they really proved they could handle a bigger storyline. And of course, how better to handle such a polarizing topic with two very strong sides than to handle them between two girls who wake up in the same bedroom every single morning. So now we have the story, we have the characters. Let's set the stage about the politics of abortion in 1989. One of the things that Degrassi does best is they reflect the world around them as it happens. For a very quick history on abortion, because I know we're just here to talk about Degrassi, but this matters, I promise. Abortion became illegal in the late 1800s, and it wasn't until 100 years later that Canada started to see some progress. In 1969, which was only 20 years before this episode came out, the first change to abortion law came into effect, and it now said women could have an abortion if their health was at risk. And over those 20 years, abortion became a big social topic. It was in 1988, which was just 1 year before this Degrassi episode came out, that the Supreme Court of Canada said restricted access to abortions was unconstitutional. In fact, it violated women's rights in the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms, which clearly stated that a woman had a right to life, liberty, and security of person. And a woman can't have those things if she's forced to go through a pregnancy. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. But at this time that the episode was being made, there was a court case where a woman wanted to have an abortion, but her boyfriend wanted her to have the baby. So he took her to court over it. And the result was the final decision that men had no legal right to a woman's abortion decision, which may be the reason we never actually meet the father involved in Erica's pregnancy. In a TV magazine interview, the actors actually commented on how prevalent the topic of abortion was around them. One of the twins said, "When we started filming, it was around the time of all the court battles about abortion. We'd see it on TV, go home and read about it, and I was even learning about it in health class." And of course, Linda Schuyler's motto for Degrassi is if teenagers are talking about it, then the topic is never too taboo for TV. So now that we know what the world was like around Erica, let's take a look at her story and how a 16-year-old girl becomes faced with the decision to have an abortion. The episode titled A New Start is the first episode of Degrassi High. We learn that Erica had a summer fling and lost her virginity, and it's later revealed they only used a condom some of the time. Now, it's about 12 minutes into the episode when Erica finally admits to her twin sister Heather that she may be pregnant. And Degrassi does something here that they do all of the time without the audience really noticing. Erica says, "I think I'm pregnant," and then she lists all of her symptoms. Her period's late, her breasts are sore, she throws up every morning. And this is a subtle way that Degrassi educates their audience without pulling them out of the story. Degrassi may be the only time someone's talking to a young person about sex or about pregnancy, and Degrassi constantly slips in these little educational moments that don't feel all that educational. Because remember, Linda was a junior high school teacher, and this is just another way she brings those educational values into the story. Degrassi then walks us through, well, I don't want to go to my doctor, they might tell my parents. Well, you can find a safe friend. Go to the drugstore and buy a pregnancy test. It'll have all of the instructions on the back, which is something you might not think of if you're 16, alone, and scared. And Degrassi's not advocating to keep secrets from adults, it's showcasing the reality that teenagers go to their peers before they go to their parents. What's interesting is when Erica takes the pregnancy test, Heather asks, "What are we gonna do? What are we gonna tell mom and dad?" But when Erica says, "If I have an abortion, they'll never have to know," Heather becomes upset and she starts to say things like, "You can't do that and what you're doing is wrong." And I think this scene just really shows you how isolating and shameful and lonely this experience can be for young women. Even Erica's biggest support system is condemning her for even thinking about having an abortion. In the real world, some of the biggest protests against abortion come from a religious perspective. And what's interesting is that Erica is very visibly wearing a cross throughout the whole episode. And Heather even says, abortion is wrong. You know what the minister says. However, Degrassi's intent here wasn't actually to discredit or debate any religious beliefs. Instead, what Degrassi's doing is showing that two girls who grew up in the same household with the same anti-abortion rhetoric grew up to have two different opinions. It's easy to have an opinion about another person's choice when you're not the one going through it, but now Erica's really faced with it. She's really 16 and she's pregnant, and her views are starting to change. Heather even goes on to say, I think it's horrible to think about all those babies dying every day in those killing centers. She means a women's health clinic, and that provokes a very strong and upsetting image that Heather would have been taught. Abortion is wrong, you know what the minister says. And Erica would have been taught that exact same thing, making this personal decision that much harder to face. What kind of person am I if everyone thinks I'm killing a baby? So now we know what kind of pressure Erica's facing at home, but what about at school? If the little educational moments weren't a big hint that Degrassi was created by a school teacher, this next part definitely will be. Degrassi is one of the few shows set in high school that truly uses the classroom as a classroom. For example, during the AIDS episode, they actually have two guest speakers come to talk to the class about being HIV positive. In The Next Generation, Dr. Sally talks to Emma and Manny's class about gonorrhea after an STD outbreak. And in this episode, the teacher started to become frustrated because he isn't getting any engagement from the class. So he says, okay, fine. We'll talk about whatever you guys want as long as we talk about it as a group. And Erica raises her hand. She says, what about abortion? Quickly, the students get into a debate, and it almost mirrors that moment during the auditions when the actors were improvising pro-life and pro-choice monologues. But what Degrassi's doing here is the students are all yelling out things you would hear in the media at the time, in conversations, some common misconceptions about abortion. Pro-life students would say, you'll never be able to have a baby again. It's murder. Women will just use it as birth control. And on the pro-choice side, kids say, it's not a baby, it's a fetus. Women aren't baby incubators. You can't deny a person's choice. And later, when Erica goes to the abortion clinic, the nurse actually dismisses a lot of these misconceptions that come up. If Erica wants to have children in the future, she'll have no problem with that. But for now, Erica doesn't say anything. She sits in the middle of this loud room with all of her peers screaming and yelling, all the thoughts that have already filled her mind. The teacher even says, I hope none of you have to deal with that personally, but no one thinks to check up on Erica. Heather even scolds Erica for bringing it up at all. After class, Heather approaches Spike and asks for help. She wants to talk Erica out of her abortion. Spike chose to have her baby, so she must be anti-abortion, right? Well, Spike says, just because I had Emma doesn't mean I know everything. Abortion was wrong for me. That was my choice. Heather tries to fight her back on it, but Spike stands her ground. She says, it's great to have high ideals and stuff, but when you're in that situation, right and wrong can get complicated. And I think that just really exemplifies that this situation looks different for every single person. Degrassi's not saying what's right or what's wrong. It's really showing you that with any big moment in your life, you get to make the choice that's best for you. Now, there's a really powerful moment when Erica visits the women's health clinic. She's 16, she's completely alone, and there's a group of protesters outside the clinic holding up signs of aborted fetuses, screaming things like, you're a murderer. And what's interesting about this scene is the real-life actress who plays Erica actually did this to prepare for the episode. Degrassi offered to send someone with her so she could go speak to a counselor and research her role, but she said no, she wanted to do it fully on her own and know what that experience was like. What did it feel like to be a 16-year-old girl and approach an abortion clinic all by yourself? And she said it was scary to face all that verbal abuse, especially when they didn't even know her situation. And she said she was recognized for being that girl from Degrassi, and it made things even tougher. When the actress was doing her research, she said the most impactful thing she learned was that for most young girls, this is the first time they have to make a mature decision like this all on their own. And amongst those feelings of sadness and fear, there's a feeling of relief and pride. In the episode, when Erica makes it to the clinic, the counselor gives her an explanation of the procedure, recovery time, and provides a lot of information on not only the physical effects of abortion, but how big the mental and emotional effect can be as well. The counselor gives her all the information she needs and says, just come back when you're ready. Erica asks Heather to come with her, but Heather says, no, what you're doing is wrong and I can't support it. But after her conversation with Spike, Heather decides to go find her sister at the clinic. Erica's just about to face the protesters all over again, all on her own, when her sister calls behind her. Heather says, I may think what you're doing is wrong, but you're my sister and I can't let you go alone. She takes Erica's hand and they push through the crowd together and up to the clinic's doors. And that may be where the episode ends, but it's just where the controversy begins. Though Degrassi High never actually shows Erica following through with her abortion, Degrassi's US distributors felt like the ending wasn't appropriate to air. Instead, in the American version, the twins never go through the protesters at all, leaving it up in the air if she actually chose to have her abortion or not. However, Linda Schuyler and Kit Hood weren't in on the discussion. They didn't get to have their voice in the decision. In protest, Kit even said he wanted his name taken out of the credits because it's not the story they were trying to tell. And Kate Taylor, who was kind of the facilitator between the Canadian show and the US broadcasters, Kit said that Kate put her personal bias into the decision. Kate responded and said it was a creative choice to have a more ambiguous ending for the US viewers, and went on to say this ending was even more Degrassi than the original ending. Something I want to point out is the Degrassi High episode was just censored. Later on, Manny's abortion episode would be banned completely, which goes to show you how much more intense the conversation around abortion becomes, and instead of it necessarily getting better. But for now, Linda Schuyler said the episode isn't to say a pregnant teenager has to choose between having a baby or having an abortion. She said, we're saying these are the things you have to consider before you make your choice. Regardless of any ambiguity in the episode's ending, it's hard to dismiss that Erica had an abortion. In the following episodes, we learn that Erica's having nightmares and talking in her sleep, but she refuses to go see a counselor. There's rumors being spread about Erica in the hallway. And Heather becomes worried when Erica starts dating again. She sees her kiss a boy in the hallway and immediately brings up that Erica needs to be careful because she recently had an abortion, showing the social stigma that comes with being sexually active after having this procedure. But the biggest issue that Erica faces is with Spike's best friend, Liz. Liz was very vocally against abortion in the classroom debate, and now she started to bully Erica. She calls her a murderer and leaves notes on her locker. When Erica finally catches her, they get into a physical fistfight and have to be pulled off of one another. Degrassi High really does well at showing the after effects of having an abortion in the 80s. It comes up repeatedly how this decision affected her mental health and her social life. And of course, she wasn't the only Degrassi character who had to deal with this. Now, before I move on, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Jocelyn, there were actually 4 abortions on Degrassi. And this is true. In the 1992 Schools Out movie, we learned about Joey hooking up with Tessa Campanelli and Caitlin saying the infamous, "You were effing Tessa Campanelli?" And Tessa actually becomes pregnant from this and decides to have an abortion. However, the only reason I'm not going to dive into it is because we see Tessa enter a women's health clinic for a pregnancy test. Then Tessa comes back for an appointment, and that's it. It's 2 scenes that are each 30 seconds long. It's an important story to tell, and it gave us that ambiguous ending that the US loves so much, but nothing really new comes out of it. Politically, however, abortion was still ramping up as a hot-button issue. At the time this movie was being made, progressive conservatives were trying to pass bills that would hold doctors legally accountable for performing abortions. So just because abortion was available doesn't mean that socially it was now acceptable, if that makes sense. As well, it's all handled at the provincial level. So depending on where you live, access to abortion services is inconsistent, and there was a lot of barriers around supporting it. And even still in 2022, it's not perfect. I live in Prince Edward Island, and we only had our first abortion performed here just a few years ago, meaning women had to travel across a bridge or by boat to another province just to have an abortion. So if abortion is still this inaccessible in 2022, what did the world look like for 14-year-old Manny Santos when she had an abortion on Degrassi: The Next Generation? Accidents Will Happen is the 14th episode in season 3 of Degrassi. And like I said, it's also one of the most talked about moments in Degrassi history. So I won't be going nearly as in-depth to Manny's story because there's so many little moments that build up to her abortion. I mean, I could talk about how the episode opens with her at a gymnastics meet and how that's to show us that Manny has a strong relationship with her body. Or how I think that the scene where Manny uses a calendar to track her period was a progressive moment for representing women's health to young people. But instead of going through all of those small details one by one, I want to talk about 4 main things that stand out to me about this episode. I want to highlight the differences between Erica and Manny's abortion. I want to talk about how Spike is a key character in both episodes, the impact of using real counselors and educators on set, and of course, the controversial ending. So let's get into it. One thing I want to point out right away is in Erica's story, the word abortion is said over 30 times. It can be read on protest signs. There's photos of fetuses everywhere. But in Manny's episode, the word abortion is only said once. It doesn't appear in any pamphlet she reads. It doesn't appear on any signs. And it takes until 16 minutes into the second episode for the word to even come up. So clearly there was a lot of red tape around this issue, which is interesting because it came out 13 years after the first one, where they said abortion 30 times. So we've clearly actually gone backwards in how acceptable abortion is. And the episode was constantly undergoing rewrites and being re-edited, and they were told things like, you can't say abortion, you can't show a fetus, and given all of these new rules to follow. But the biggest difference between Erica and Manny's story has to be the involvement of the father. A few episodes prior, Manny had unprotected sex with her longtime crush Craig, who of course had an on-again, off-again relationship with his girlfriend Ashley. And what's so funny about that is because Craig is Joey Jeremiah's stepson. And Craig is in a situation where he has a girlfriend and he gets another girl pregnant, just like Joey did in the movie School's Out. And I don't know why we didn't get a classic line like, you were effing Manny Santos? But even though Craig is involved and informed, he doesn't actually impact Manny's final decision. Craig thinks they should keep it. And when Manny says, well, she doesn't say it, she's not allowed to say it. When Manny heavily implies she wants an abortion, he screams, no, I won't let you. Craig being involved is just a different way to push the same idea that it's ultimately your own choice and no one can tell you what to do, not even the biological father. One thing that is similar in this story, though, is Erica and Manny face a lot of criticism. For Erica, her biggest critic is Spike's best friend, Liz. For Manny, it's Spike's daughter, Emma. But we learn Emma has such a strong opinion about abortion because her mom was in the exact same situation as Manny. If Spike decided to have an abortion, Emma wouldn't be here. The next generation wouldn't be here. And it's almost the same thing for Liz. Her passion is because her father told her mom to have an abortion, but her mom said no. So they both feel personally connected to the issue, but of course, ultimately another person's feelings aren't the reason to have a baby. You're still the one who has to take care of it. One of the writers also made a comment that this episode wasn't about pushing politics, but instead reflecting the truth of each character. And I love that they made this distinction this time around, because we should really believe how each character reacts instead of just subscribing them to say, okay, this character's for it, okay, this character's against it. For example, Craig wants Manny to keep the baby because he doesn't have a family of his own. Both of his parents died before he even turned 16. So regardless of his politics on if he agrees with abortion or not, his personal connection to losing his family would drive his reaction to want to keep the baby. And clearly the same thing for Emma. Emma's a very politically left-wing, freedom of choice, hippie kind of girl, and you would assume that she's pro-choice. But because of her personal stakes in it, her politics don't matter. And what's interesting is that Emma's mom, Spike, has a completely different opinion. Spike's pregnancy storyline was the catalyst for Erica's abortion episode in the 80s. Emma being born is the reason we have Degrassi: The Next Generation. So I just feel like as Degrassi fans, we're super lucky that Spike appears in both of these episodes, even when they're 13 years apart. I just think that's super cool. But I also love that Spike's opinion about abortion doesn't change at all, even though so much time has passed. In the 80s, she tells Heather that she's not anti-abortion, it just wasn't the right choice for her. And now she tells Manny the exact same thing. You get to make your own choice. And originally, the writers planned that Manny would ask Spike to go to the abortion clinic with her. They thought it made sense. Manny knows Spike went through this before. It's easier sometimes to reach out to your best friend's mom. But ultimately, Manny does make the choice. She wants her mom to be with her when she goes to the clinic. And this was a big deal for the show. James Hurst was a writer at the time, and he said it's one of Degrassi's core values that adults don't get involved. He said, on Degrassi, you're not supposed to have a parent just come in and fix everything. But the writers agreed that this moment felt different. Now, I said before, the Degrassi classic cast like Spike, Caitlin, Joey, Snake, they all kind of get a free pass because they were once teenagers on the show themselves. But before this episode, there's been very few times that Degrassi's involved parents in the story. In the season prior, there's a character named Paige who gets assaulted at a house party. And then it was a big discussion on if this is now the time a parent should step in. But they felt like Paige or any other young girls in her situation would likely go to a friend first, and then maybe a guidance counselor before they ever went to their own parent. And this level of planning and attention to detail isn't just for the writers of the show. Let's talk about how the entire production team plays a role in telling authentic stories for teenagers. Linda did more than use the classrooms on Degrassi as teaching moments. Those lessons extended to the art department, set design, wardrobe, makeup. When Degrassi did big topic episodes like abortion or suicide or self-harm, they brought in real-life counselors and educators to the set and sent those departments out for their own research. For example, at the end of the episode, when Manny's at the women's health clinic, you might not even notice it, but there's a basket of crackers on the table, because women who go to the clinic and are pregnant are likely to feel nauseous, and crackers help with that. And it's a detail the audience might not even pick up on, but it's authentic. Or when Manny asks Paige for advice, she asks, "How do I know if a guy used a condom?" This scene led to a huge debate on if this conversation would even happen at all. Would Manny really not know? And in the show, the girls talk about it, and Paige tells her it's probably best to just ask him. Then Paige says, "Remember, hun, ask questions first, get naked later." And the writers were actually advised that this line wasn't appropriate to use. Advisors were saying that Degrassi was missing out on an opportunity to educate teenagers. You don't have to be naked for it to be considered sex, which is a big misconception, but ultimately just not the focus of this episode, so they did decide to keep it in. But that just goes to show you this level of detail and picking through every single thing you see on camera, every single word you hear in the script, how important it is to Degrassi that they get it right and that they tell the story in a true-to-life way. And that brings us to the most controversial part of the episode, when Manny decides to have her abortion. Erica Farrell only ever made it to the front door of the clinic. For American viewers watching the censored version, she only stood outside. Manny ends her episode inside the clinic and talking to a counselor. The conversation Manny has and the conversation Erica had are pretty much the exact same. What's the procedure like? How will I feel physically? How will I feel emotionally? And that goes to show you that the personal feelings of abortion hadn't really changed. But socially and politically, we can see there's an even bigger divide, because Canadian broadcasters are now saying, okay, yeah, you can do the episode, but you can't say this word. Or you can do the episode, but you can't show this. And Linda Schuyler said in a final moment of the episode, Manny had a slight smile on her face. And the broadcaster said, I don't know if we can air that because it kind of looks like she wants to have an abortion. And Linda's like, well, that's the point. She does want to have an abortion. Manny could have ended the episode crying. It's still a very valid reaction, but it just wasn't the story they were trying to tell. In the 80s, the US said, you can say the word abortion 24 times, we'll show the little baby fetuses, but we want it up in the air on if she chooses it or not. In the 2000s, they're saying, okay, I know you only said abortion once, you never really show a fetus or anything a reasonable person could deem offensive, but we're just not going to air your episode at all. But why? Why was this now so different? Well, an executive from The End said, it's a matter of tone. It's a serious episode and the summer schedule is all lighthearted. I beg you to watch season 3 of Degrassi and tell me it's lighthearted. Marco getting gay bashed? Oh, honey, that's just summer fun. Terry's in a coma? Girl, more time to work on your tan. Like, what? It was also now a question of, with the episode being banned, did it actually draw more attention to it? American kids were now going online to try to download Accidents Will Happen so they could see it. Knowing that there's this secret Degrassi episode was even more intriguing to them. And fans were passionate about it. They created petitions online and were asking questions like, what's the difference? Why can a Canadian teenager watch this, but not an American teenager? When the DVD was released for season 3, it actually had a tagline that said, includes the episode you can't see on TV. As well, if you cut out Erica's abortion episode, it would have been really confusing because of all the episodes that follow where her abortion is mentioned. However, for Manny, the topic is never brought up again. Some fans of Degrassi didn't even know that it happened at all until they eventually aired the episodes a few years later. But with all of that being said, even with all of this controversy around the episode, it did a lot to help young girls going through similar situations in real life. Cassie Steele, who plays Manny, said she received numerous letters and heard all of these stories from fans who related to Manny. And she said, I didn't process the significance of that episode until much later, and it made me really proud to be part of something like that. Oh, and Degrassi wasn't only telling stories about abortion. Degrassi tackles pregnancy with Liberty and Jenna, who decide to explore adoption. Claire is eager to have her baby with Eli, but they have a miscarriage. We meet characters like Mia and Vanessa, who already went through their pregnancies and now have toddlers while in high school. And Degrassi showed all sides of the story. It's not until 13 years later that Degrassi Next Class explores, in my opinion, the most progressive episode about abortion ever seen on TV, with 16-year-old Lola Pacini. Lola's storyline takes place almost 30 years after Erica's. Now, in America, things have gotten much worse. Anti-abortion bills were proposed over and over and over again, even ones that would have the mother punishable by death. Now, those didn't go through, but it just goes to show you how just because it's legal doesn't make it easy. The way conservative governments get around stuff like this is instead of banning abortion, they pull public funding from any centers that perform abortions, making them even harder to access. And today, states like Texas have a heartbeat bill, where if a heartbeat is detected, a woman can't have an abortion. Now in Canada, the topic of abortion was becoming less socially taboo. By this point, there's even more access to safe abortions, less social stigma, and there's even laws about safe zones, meaning protesters must be a certain distance away from a women's health clinic. And in 2017, there was even an abortion-inducing pill introduced in Canada that is now covered by insurance. However, I do want to stress that even though it's seen as being better in Canada, it doesn't always mean it's easier, and everyone still has their own experience. But even so, when Lola found out she was pregnant, she was in an entirely new world from the ones that Manny and Erica had faced. Lola's episode in Degrassi Next Class opens with her sitting in the girls' bathroom, counting down the timer on her pregnancy test. This time, it's in the first 5 seconds that we learn our main character is pregnant. And even better, it's within the first 5 minutes that she says, I want to have an abortion. Now, to be fair, this episode is only a one-parter. The other episodes had 2 parts dedicated to their stories, but honestly, Degrassi just didn't need it this time. They hit the ground running with the story. We didn't need any build-up. We didn't need to see Lola struggle with her decision. This time, she was just gonna have an abortion. Now, the father is not involved in this story either. He does find out, but not until after Lola already had the procedure. But I have to give you the history of how Lola got pregnant, because it is the most Degrassi thing I will ever say on this podcast. Lola lost her virginity to Miles. Miles, of course, is in a relationship. He has a boyfriend. Where's his boyfriend? Oh, he's just in a coma, fighting for his life after a Degrassi school bus crashed on the way to a volleyball game. No big deal. Now, there are 2 details that I love about this story. Yes, Lola gets pregnant, but she never actually regretted losing her virginity, which is a huge deal because teen sex is usually portrayed as like losing your virginity is this huge deal and you'll regret it if it's not with the right person. But Lola's just like, hey, this was fun. That's cool. Sorry about your boyfriend, I guess. For example, in the 90s, Beverly Hills 90210 aired an episode where Brenda loses her virginity and she enjoys it. But soon after, her and her boyfriend break up. Why? Audiences did not respond well to a teenage girl enjoying sex. Could you hear that eye roll? But also in Degrassi, I love that Lola was on birth control. Now, obviously, it didn't work out too well for her, but it is something that's very common to be on birth control even if you're not sexually active because it has other positives. So we just love that Lola is this positive queen who's taking care of herself. Now, even though this episode is by far the most progressive, Lola does face some criticism. Her friends Frankie and Shay say they would die or be so embarrassed to be pregnant in high school. And they even say, actually, I want to try to say this the exact way that Frankie does. I mean, abortion is kind of a big deal. It is like killing a baby after all. Which, okay, this definitely sucks for Lola to hear all this, but it does pale in comparison to Erica, who got like death threats every single day. It is important that even in the most positive representations of a story to show the reality that not everyone is going to love your decision. Though Frankie and Shay do come around and say like, hey, we were being judgmental. I have no idea what that's actually like, and we support you. But one of the things that stands out about Lola's story is she doesn't need validation from anyone around her. Before the episode even began, Lola made the decision to have an abortion. Lola starts off confident. She knows an abortion is the right choice for her. She says, I decided 2 weeks ago when I first thought I might be pregnant. But Degrassi shows the reality that even if you are so sure of what you want, there can still be a lot of guilt and fear and loneliness that can come with deciding to have an abortion. Lola says she feels bad, that she doesn't feel bad, and that causes her a lot of stress. Her friend Yael reassures Lola that abortion is very common, but the world just makes everyone too scared to talk about it. Lola asks, what would you do if you were me? And Yael says, I don't think that really matters. For the first time, we're not seeing, okay, this person's pro-choice and this person's pro-life. We're just seeing a supportive friend. After Lola has the procedure, she goes to school and everything's okay. With Erica and Manny, we just kind of left them at the abortion clinic. We don't really know what happens next. But Lola goes to school and gives a presentation. She just says she's feeling a little crampy, but she's relieved. When she shares her project in front of the class, she doesn't realize it, but you can see her browser history. And she was researching how to get an abortion. She's embarrassed, but after talking to Yale again, she feels better and decides she wants to talk about it more. Lola does these weekly vlogs where she talks about makeup and fashion, but this time she wants to talk about her abortion. She says, "Yesterday I was pregnant and now I'm not. And I'd like to talk about it." She ends the episode laughing and giggling with her friends. They get celebratory ice cream together, and at the end of the day, it's just not a big deal. This is the first abortion episode where she's allowed to be happy. She doesn't have to feel regret or go through this big dilemma to validate her choice. And that's not even the biggest part of the episode. Lola, for the first time, has her abortion on screen. She goes into the procedure room, scoots down on the chair, and a doctor performs an abortion. He tells her all the steps he's going to go through, what it's going to feel like, and that it'll only take 5 minutes. Lola asks, "Am I the first 16-year-old you've ever done this to?" And the doctor replies, "You're not even the first today." In real life, if you were thinking about having an abortion, even as an adult, I'm confident that going inside the doctor's office is probably one of the scariest parts of the experience. But if you got to watch it play out on screen and see that it's actually not that scary and not that intimidating, I'm sure that would make an impact. I had no idea what to expect. I mean, like, just a few years ago, these were being called murder centers, and now we're watching a 16-year-old girl inside of one, and it's not a big deal. And to emphasize it's not a big deal, Degrassi changes their story structure for the first time ever. When Degrassi handles a big moment, the B-plot, or the second story that's kind of running through the episode, is usually lighthearted. In A New Start, the kids are getting hazed on the first day of high school. They're getting covered in shaving cream, tied to lampposts. It's all just a series of lighthearted pranks. In Accidents Will Happen, Liberty tries to make JT jealous by hitting on Sean. She dresses up like a girl from Greece and says, "Hey, I'm edgy, I'm on fire." And it's comic relief from the big, heavy moments that come with abortion as a main storyline. But Lola's episode? It's actually kind of funny. When Lola didn't get to finish her presentation, the teacher gave her an extension, and Lola says, "Wow, he must be pro-choice." And these are all the little moments that you can kind of smile at. The B-plot is about Maya being depressed. She's having suicidal thoughts and breaks down to her mom that she really needs help. The comic relief from this intense moment was Lola's story. And there wasn't even a lot of controversy around it outside of the show. Degrassi had a lot of freedom to tell the story they wanted to tell. Stefan Brogren, who played Snake and was also an executive director, said, "I couldn't believe when they said we were going to do it. And then I couldn't believe we hadn't done it before." Amanda Arcuri, who played Lola on the show, said, "Kids are not educated about their own sexual health. I wanted to do the story justice. I wanted it to be perfect for everyone out there experiencing this situation." Amanda wasn't even worried about any backlash she might face for playing a teenage character who has an abortion. She was mostly worried she wouldn't do it justice. And I think that just goes to show Degrassi doesn't just tell their stories well, they make sure they find the right people to tell them. And no matter how much pushback they face, Degrassi will always stand up for what's right. But what I really want to know is, what do you think? How do you feel about the way Degrassi handled abortion? Do you think the episode should have been banned? Do you think it was ahead of its time? What's your perspective on it all? Because I just gave you mine, and I want to stop talking now and hear what you think. And of course, I have to say a big thank you to my Patreon supporters: Renee Breshett, Evie's Treasures, Max, Teal Joyce, Shay Trimmer, Annie Clark, Link, Sarah J, Liza Kavanaugh, and Ashley Atchley for supporting the podcast. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening. Talking about Degrassi is obviously one of my favorite things in the world, and getting to do it with you guys has been a really rewarding experience. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping me make future episodes, you can find the link in the description to donate as little as $3 a month. And you can also tell me what you think about the episode. I really want to hear what you think. It truly means a lot to me. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Degrassi Kid Podcast. Bye, guys.